Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hartford Board of Education Workshop, November 14th. I am calling this meeting to order. I'm the second vice chair, Miss Board Member Escribano, Jair Escribano. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. We're going to get started just to respect everyone's time. I am going to pass it along to the superintendent, Dr. Torres Rodriguez, to give us a foundation, what we're going to talk about today, and talk about question and answers on how we're going to set up that protocol. So, Superintendent, the floor is all yours. And also, before I hand it off, Mr. Rivera will be here at 6, and I will then be passing the baton back to him, just so we're clear. All right, Superintendent, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Escribano, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are here with our team, and we appreciate having the opportunity to review and discuss our efforts and progress related to attendance, culture, climate, and engagement, which is a major focus and priority within our district model for excellence. As Board Member Escribano said, I am going to tee up the presentation and we'll be turning things over after a few slides to our Chief of Schools, Corinne Barney, and her team. We also have Dr. Silver joining us as well. And then with regard to questions, Ms. Escribano, I recommend that we pause after each data-rich slide for any questions, so that we can kind of pause and take time. I know that the presentation was sent yesterday, and so I just want to make sure that there's ample time to reflect on the information and have conversation before proceeding to another slide, if that sounds appropriate to you.
Absolutely. We'll follow your lead here. So that sounds great. Thank you.
Great, and thank you, Ms. Santiago, for supporting with the presentation. We'll go to the next slide, which is a slide that looks familiar, which is an overview of District Model for Excellence and Strategic Plan, which is now in the final of 3 years. And this was a plan to promote academic excellence, emotional recovery, social and emotional well-being, specifically utilizing our COVID relief funding, commonly referred to as ESSER. And it's important for us to continue to reference this plan, especially as we think about moving beyond the ESSER funding. This plan was comprised of the 4 major priorities, which you see there. And this is essentially what has driven us forward over the last couple of years, and is guiding us through this year and beyond. And while this is a plan that is integrated, we are going to focus specifically tonight on culture, welcoming culture and nurturing climate aspect of these 4 priorities. This is a relatively newer slide for most of you. What we have are the strategic priorities. You see those across the top of the planning framework, which does apply to the development of our plans for school excellence and accountability. Those are the plans that each of the schools are working in terms of their improvement efforts. What I want to call out is that while we have 3 focus areas, right, instruction, engagement, and talent, we're going to be primarily focused on the engagement piece for tonight's overview. And under engagement, you'll see that deepening student connections to school is a required goal for all of our schools. And that goal might be accomplished through a variety of means and tactics, but the goal, right, to deepen those connections, the student connection to the school, remains consistent. A little more context setting before I turn it over. And I just wanted to address the historical context and raise that we considered, right, chronic absenteeism and engagement a challenge, a crisis before the pandemic. It was in 2017, 2018, when back then our chronic absenteeism was around 25%. And we determined that it did require a systemic approach and a plan to really understand the root cause of the absences on a more personal level. And there was then the development of our district and school-based attendance culture and engagement teams, the ACE teams. This is when the introduction of the home visits happened, right? Literally going door to door to understand some of the barriers that were preventing the families from getting their children, especially the younger children, to school, or in the case of our more older students, what was preventing them from attending school regularly. It's also when we better understood the health considerations and the need to break down inequities in healthcare, right? So we created the student engagement specialist position, and we pushed to enhance our alternative programming and more to get at the deeper levels of those root causes and begin to customize solutions and interventions based on individual student need. And in the last couple of years, Chief Barney has been deeply involved in this work. So I'm going to turn it over to her so that she can kind of walk us through where we currently are and some of the work that is happening across the district. And also, Chief Barney, if you can also speak to how we're moving forward in also response to the state Department of Education and their work with us on not just focusing on chronic absenteeism, but also focusing broadly on culture, climate, and the engagement piece.
Thank you, Superintendent. So just to kind of frame before we head into what we like to lift as our priorities, this connects to the previous slide that Superintendent showed around where we were and where we are going in connection to the priorities and the goals that we lifted connected to the DME. So last year, we ended the school year at 37.3%. The target goal on our scorecard was 34.9%. So as you can see with the chart, we were close. We did not hit the goal, but we are trending back down to pre-pandemic levels. Our goal for this year on our scorecard is 23.8%, which will again put us very close to where we were pre-pandemic and set us on the path for success in the next school year. So speaking of our goals around ACE, attendance, culture, and engagement, the next slide highlights really the work that we continue to do. So as the superintendent lifted, a lot of the focus was around our attendance piece, getting them to come to school. So by doing that, we ensured that we had norm practices around taking attendance, identification of root cause, and alignment with intervention, connected to our MTSS process, and then really working to develop a process to ensure that all of our medical paperwork was completed so that kids could enter school on time. We also are working on updating our data collection system so that outreach logs are completed with detailed information so that we can gather the data around root cause, and then started the big lift around MTSS plans for all students that were Tier 3 previous years and are currently identified as Tier 3. You can see as we move through the presentation, we'll be shifting to the focus and the work in collaboration with the state around moving, not just focusing solely on the attendance piece, but that culture and engagement. So how can we further engage our students who may not be engaged in school? And also looking at what are the practices we have in place. That would be the box up top, which would be our PBIS, our positive behavior interventions and supports, as well as RAP, which is restorative approaches and practices. So what does that look like, and how have those practices been utilized within school to help re-engage our students? Especially when we look at the data, you'll see our middle and high school levels, which is also connected to the work at the state level, because the state is seeing the highest rates of chronic absenteeism and disengagement at high school across all demographics, across all cities and towns. And really that is the problem of practice they're grappling with at that level. So the next slide shares some of the normed practices. This is not all of them, but we've spent a lot of time around clear communication, norming practices, and then data. How are we using data to really drive our decision making? So one of the things that we did is we normed on the ACE agenda. So that would be the first document that you are viewing. And in order to support all of ACE, the attendance piece plus the culture engagement, this year the shift was we were solely focusing really all of our data and our practices on attendance data last year. Now we are shifting at the district level and at the school level between attendance one week and culture and engagement the following week. So building out our data dashboards, providing teams for professional learning and coaching supports around how to use that data to drive decision-making connected to what we did and what was successful with attendance. We also have normed practices. One of the feedback that we received was that staff liked the Vita that we were sending out, which was very important information around things happening within schools, within central office. So we were sending out something similar last year, but the team really took the time to align the next visual that you're looking at in the middle to the Vita, where we're sharing the data on a weekly basis. We're giving schools shout outs for the work that they are doing, but then we are also providing them with a one-stop shop for all of the data, the handbooks, the parent letters, anything that they need, any resource they need pertaining to attendance, culture, and engagement. And then the last one is just an example of how students are tiered and just a beginning of how we are using the data to drive our decision making. So our students that would be colored in the green, they're really tier 1. They need those tiered supports. Yellow, those are our students that are on the cusp. They're tier 3. And then our red are our tier 3 students who are in need of high leverage interventions and or MTSS. And in the past, our triangle was inverted where we were really high red and not green. And we are reversing the triangle so that our students are now falling more in tier 1 and tier 2 and moving out of tier 3. The next slide is where we get into the data. So here is end of October. So you can see the data is year to date, and it is from, it includes the average daily attendance, the ADA, as well as the chronic absentee rate. And it is comparative over the years. So it is October to October. So you could see that 2018-19, we had an average ADA of 92%. Right now, currently, we are tracking at about 90%. So again, higher than last year, not as high as pre-pandemic, but headed back in that direction. And it is actually one of the strongest Octobers that we have had. And so then looking at the chronic absentee rate, again, you can see 18-19, we were at 21%. Currently, we are at 25.9%. So we have almost a 5% reduction from last year this time. And we are currently looking at how that is going to track to hit the target of 28.5 for the yearly goal. The next slide then breaks down our chronic absentee rates by grade. And so as you can see, most of the grades have reduced since last October. Grades 3 to 5 have under 20% CA. And as a glow and the reverse of what I've normally presented, our kindergarten has had the greatest reduction. So in the past, kindergarten has been a pain point. Because just getting the kiddos to school, getting them registered on time, also ensuring, they have all the correct medical paperwork handed in, and then just getting used to the routines of going to school. And also a lot of our little babies have this may be their first experience. So illness tends to be a very big root cause. So a lot of that work with kindergarten is attributed to our summer work, which you'll see in later slides with our Twilight teams, going out to do home visits and supporting families as well. But you can see that we've had improvement across grades 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, and 12. Again, 9th and 10th grade is also an area that we are seeing a reduction, but we would like to further see the data reduce.
Chief Barney, we have 2 more data slides here, so I'm just doing a check. We can do the next 2 and then pause.
Okay, yeah, that's why I did a long pause. I wasn't sure if we were pausing for questions or not. All right, so this slide showcases several things. So first, names that 37 out of the 39 schools have reduced the chronic absentee rate. So you can see that 2 of our schools have grown their CA, University High by a small margin, and then Burr by a larger margin. So we do have active action plans in place to support both schools with a reduction, and we do know what both of the root causes are, and are working to support them around attendance and culture and engagement, because at one school, it is the culture and engagement piece. Then you can see that the remaining schools are all trending down. There are several schools that have had rates that are reduced by over 5%. And then Dwight Belize is one on the end who has reduced their percentage rate by over 20 points. I do want to also shout them out because their chronic absentee rate is lower than it has ever been. And they attribute a lot of this work to the correlation with all of the practices that they have put in place around what we have rolled out as our Big Rocks. If you notice at the bottom, there are several schools that are boxed in green. And the reason they are boxed in green, there are additional schools on here who have student engagement specialists. Those are our SESs that work to support attendance. However, they are in the general budget. The schools in green have student engagement specialists that were added through ESSER funding. And that, as we know, is ending this year. So they have been integral in helping to reduce the chronic absentee rate. And they were also added to the schools based on their CA rate being 40% or higher, in support of putting in place practices to re-engage our families. And then there is one more data slide, which showcases our home visits and our Twilight visits. So as you can see, in 22-23, we did 474 in October. As of this October, we have done 976 home visits. So again, continuing to use home visits proactively to determine a root cause if we do not have strong communication with the family, and or support with implementation of interventions. You can also see that in August, we had 317. In July, we had September, we had 789. And in July, we had 737. So if you're looking at the slide, yes, we've had more home visits in the summer because we've shifted our work to the summer to be proactive so that our new families feel welcome to the school, to our families that need additional support and resources throughout the summer that they can re-engage come September. And then also to build out culture and climate. So looking at our high school did a lot around the incoming 9th graders. Our elementary schools did a lot around the kindergartners, and our middle schools did a lot with our 6th graders, our incoming 6th graders. And then you can also see that we have had an increase in our Twilight home visits as well. And those home visits occur after school hours and on the weekends. And we utilize those to continue, services outside of school, but also to support our students that are really disengaged or our families that we cannot connect with during the school day, because sometimes, the school day they're working. They have other things and appointments they need to get to. So the weekend is the best time, or the evening hours is the best time to connect with them. And that is what our student engagement specialists and Twilight team members will do. We've also expanded the Twilight team so that any staff member within a school can be a part of that team. And we do have one school that also has trained pretty much their entire staff to do home visits as well.
So we can pause here to see if there are any questions. Christina, I'm going to pass it back to you. I see Ms. Brody has a question, but in terms of who's kind of managing the flow.
Yes, board member Darius Ledger. I don't know if you are able, since Jahira, since board member Escobar had to step away unexpectedly. If not, I will just call Ms. Brody for the question. Might as well. Ms. Brody, the floor is yours.
Good evening, and I'm trying not to have this light on me, but it is what it is. So comment, I guess I'll save my, it's board leadership represented here, because I'm thinking about in the timely fashion that we receive presentations so we can look through it, digest it, and have a meaningful session with you guys. That's one note. Two, is it possible, like when we're getting data as such, if it could be like sorted in a way that we could look at elementary schools, middle schools, high schools? That would, I know, would be helpful to me in the community. But my question is around SES workers. How do we, to be equitable across the district, how do we, because not every school has one, is that correct?
Correct. I just want to, before I turn it over to the team, just the way that we started, Ms. Brody and everyone, was in our equity starter budget. We identified schools that had the highest levels of chronic absenteeism to have an SES. So not everyone did have an SES. However, right, when pandemic hit and the levels increased for everyone, there was an increase in the amount of SESs across the district. So I just wanted to get foundation, but now I'll turn it over to the team for like, where are we now in terms of SES across the district?
So yes, we're looking at, I'm trying to think how to frame this correctly. So to answer the question, yes, not every school has an SES, and to connect it to equity, we were looking at our schools that were in need of the most support in order to put the practices in place to re-engage the students. So we've already started having conversations, because we have some schools, when we're looking at equity-wise, who have reduced their chronic absentee rates to below 30%, some below 20%. They may have had an SES through the starter budget, or were given one through ESSER funding, but now the teams have capacity to do the work within the schools. And so we then are looking at redistributing. Are there schools that need additional supports from those SESs? Who might not need an SES next year? What schools might need an SES next year? So we're always looking at the data. We're looking at the practices that are in place, and we're looking at equity across the district as to who would need a student engagement specialist to help them re-engage the students based on their data if their chronic absentee rate is very high.
Follow up, Ms. Santiago.
Go ahead.
So when we're looking at that type of data, one thing I'm hoping that we have in mind is if you're looking solely at data, it will be it can present an illusion that this school doesn't need a SES because they're managing in a certain way. But in honesty, it could be that is taking like a huge chunk of time in putting a strain on, in some cases, our family support person, because they're heavily involved in doing the attendance work, but that could have them away from doing other work. So I hope we're not solely relying on data. And it's because I had a conversation at a family members that I'm supporting. The conversation just came up around a family member's attendance and me supporting my aunt in that. So I don't want it in just the conversation came up around attendance and, you know, reaching out and that sort of thing. So I don't want data just to be the only factor in the need of schools, you know, for SES. And even like if we have some schools that don't need a full-time and maybe a person can, you know, support other schools, but sometimes when we do look at data, it'll be like you don't know what goes behind or what lacks to get that one thing done. But I'm interested into seeing next year how we look at that. Well, especially next year when we won't have the same money. So that'll be another reality. It is very important. I appreciate the work around attendance and agree with the struggles of the young people who can't get themselves to school, or our older students when they decide, I just don't want to go to school. So I understand the delicate and how it can be really strenuous in this under this topic. I truly do. But that's all I had at the moment.
Chief Marnie, can you also just briefly speak to how the team of the smaller team at central office is also supporting schools, because that might get a little bit to what Ms. Brody is suggesting for us, that right, some schools might need additional support that is not a full-time person, but right, that your team is able to support for, I don't know, a month, 6 weeks, pull back out, go back in.
Yeah, I think you were reading my mind. So to piggyback on what you were saying, board member Brody, we did identify that in several cases where there was not a student engagement specialist, other team members were picking up a brunt of the load. And so you hit one of our root causes, which is why we also expanded the team at central office. So Irene Reitz is on the call. She is our very long titled assistant principal of various locations for student engagement. Erin Doyle is on the call as well. She is an assistant director. And she has a very long title as well. We just brought on Ryan Brown, who is a behavior tech that is also supporting the culture and engagement work. And so prior to being in this position, I was also doing that. I do it with the schools that I have now, but have built the capacity of the executive directors of school leadership, the EDSLs, to sit on ACE team meetings. But we also went through and we created a very strategic, like, who are your ACE team members and what is their role in that ACE team? So that not one person was carrying the brunt of the load, because we did hear that loud and clear that in certain cases their data was very low, but it was one or two people and they were struggling to manage their current role plus the attendance role. And so we've gone in and we've worked with schools for a week at a time, sometimes a month at a time. Irene currently is still working with one school on a daily basis to support the brunt of that work. We also utilize the Twilight teams as well. to support that work for the schools that don't have a student engagement specialist and may not be able to get out before and after school hours. So we have a specialized team that is just for central office, and they support our schools that may not have a student engagement specialist and need that additional support as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do see Miss Board Member Doris Ledger's hands up for a question, but I will also gladly turn over the duties to her until our chairman can join. So, Miss Doris Ledger.
And Miss Ledger, I am on. I'm traveling, so
nice.
yeah, I will be happy to fill in as well. But go ahead, Miss Ledger.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. I have a couple of questions. The first question that I have, and thank you for the presentations thus far. It's been very informative. Earlier in the presentation, there was mention of 2 schools that are still dealing with higher rate of chronic absenteeism. And I do understand that if I remember correctly, you stated that you do know the root causes. One was culture, I believe. Can you please speak a bit more to what those schools and what you're doing to, or what your plan is to improve that situation?
Yes. So one is a middle school. And so we do find it is a combination of things. So it is the attendance piece with the disengagement. It's middle school. We're new to the middle school. We may have been in the same elementary school for most of our time in Hartford. We may be new to Hartford. So we're seeing higher rates at the 6th grade at the middle school. The 7th and 8th grade is actually has lower rates of chronic absenteeism. And then the culture and engagement piece. So because of the disengagement, we do have students that are, exhibiting maybe tier 2 behaviors or need supports, outside of the classroom. So that is where we are utilizing Irene, Aaron, Ryan, myself. We've met with the principal. We met with the executive director of school leadership. We identified 3 areas of focus that they needed support around. And then we have put a plan in place. So we started this about 2 weeks ago. And so we're in about end of week 2. We did a check-in with the team as well as the principal, and we are seeing higher rates of students attending and also a reduction in student behaviors because we have supported with additional support, professional learning for the behavior technicians. We updated the schedule for the building to support social emotional development. We are also providing the staff with restorative approaches and the training around that to support student engagement as well. And then we're also utilizing the Twilight team to help with wraparound services and supports outside of school. The other school is a high school. They had they were outperforming our district last year. They had the lowest rates of chronic absenteeism. So really, when we look at the data, they're up about 1%, which I think when we pulled the kids was about 5 students. And so with that one, Irene has been working very closely with the principal and the team to support intervention plans for the students that are chronically absent, and then also looking at the tier 2 data. So are the students that are currently tier 2, were they tier 3 last year? Were they tier 1 last year? And then identifying the root causes there to support re-engagement.
I thought I saw a question pop up about the data, but I don't see it on my chat anymore. But if there was a question and I did see it, I'm not making it up.
You saw it. You hear me? I'm sorry. You did see it. I saw it too. It said, is the data just for
It's
October?
since
Had
the
something
beginning.
about
Okay.
October.
Since the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have another question. Thank you so much. So what school is this? If you can answer that question.
Yes, so it's University High Science and Engineering and Burr Middle School.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I have is with regards to, you know, dealing with these, you know, having the support. And I want to make sure that I ask this question in the right spirit. So for students who may not want to be in school, or they don't want to come to school, once you know you have the supports in place to get them to school, um, how can you relate, or can you relate performance? What does performance look like? Or are you just you know, the focus is to keep them in school or to improve attendance, as opposed to, you know, really focusing on educating them? Because I understand that, you know, attendance is important. Absolutely. We need to get them to school, but we also want these students to want to learn. And when you have students, and I'm speaking as an educator, um, when you have students who are in the building who don't want to be there, and they may do things, behave so that they can be either sent home, or they don't have to be there, or they, you know, they're removed, or whatever the case may be, it can affect the students who want to be there and who want to learn. And there's also the possibility that that particular space might not be the right space for them. That setting might not be the right setting for them, because their needs, they have certain needs that cannot be met. So my question is, what is happening to make sure that these students are being educated, that these students, and I think I'm asking a two-part question. What's being done to make sure that these students are being educated and that their needs are being met?
So thank you for the question, board member Ledger. So yes, I think you hit on why a lot of the interventions that we put in place to help support Burr, we put in place, because I agree 100%. Relationships matter. Engagement in the curriculum matters. So part of redoing the schedule was to support the academic block, and then working with the Office of Academics, the coaches that work in the building, working very closely with them as well, to support, you know, building out lesson plans, unpacking the curriculum to really support student discourse and engagement and teacher understanding and improving teacher practice. But then also to support the social emotional components as well, building out the restorative practices, building time into the schedule so that kids could really do advisory, and students could get to know one another. The teachers could get to know the students as well, because at Burr there were several new staff members, which you know, that does, to your point, exactly affect, you know, student engagement in the classroom and relationship building. So being very strategic to support the teachers and the staff around that, but then also ensuring that we're providing the students with the appropriate interventions. So that's part of, you know, really getting to the root cause of why someone might be disengaged. And so, you know, is the student a multilingual learner? Are they a student that receives special education services? Have we met to discuss like the practices that we have in place and the interventions to support them? If they are not identified, do we need to move through the MTSS process to ensure sure that they are getting the supports that they need and that this is the appropriate placement for the students. So a part of the work that the team has been doing is that wraparound work, which we've realized that we now have, to your point, exactly, students attending school at higher rates, but now we need to make them engaged in their learning. We need to make learning fun. We need to ensure that we have strong relationships, and then that we're providing them with the appropriate supports and services and placements.
Thank you so much. And I'm just going to make a comment, if I may. I'm just hoping that we're very intentional about the approach to make sure that these students are present and they are engaged and that they want to learn, because it's, we want to make sure we send the right message, especially to the children who are in those spaces, who are engaged, who are learning, and who are thriving. Because that can definitely affect the culture and the climate.
All right. Thank you, Board Member Francois. I'm not sure if there's any more questions, but to follow up Board Member Francois' question, or not question, but I know we're kind of on the same page as it is concerned the Montessori and the Montessori model. Are you seeing varying differences in the Montessori model that has more, more engagement of students showing up than, other models, or and if Montessori is not the model where people are showing up to, what's working from your perspective in our schools? Is something working more than the other? Do we need to do more? So, that's the premise and spirit of my question.
Chief Barney, before I turn it over to you, I want to say that it's at times there are, for some students, it is the theme or the model. For other students, it becomes whether or not they feel connected overall or supported overall. I think that's why this work is so complex, right? Because it might look, sound, and feel very different for a student when we compare them to another student and their experience. I'm not trying to gloss over Board Member Johnson, but it is so nuanced that for some kids, a Montessori, in this case, model works well, but for others, it doesn't. We have schools that focus on character education, and that works really well for some of those families. So I think is a variety of reasons why, and this is why we try to work in partnership with, yes, at the school level, but also with the family to really try to get to know, right, that young person.
Thank you. Ms. Corinne, do you want to kind of hop in, or?
Sure. I think I'm trying to remember the second part of your question. I apologize. Around what are we seeing that are some practices that are working? I would say uniformly across our schools, the practices that we are seeing around higher engagement would be around the relationship piece. When students feel strongly connected to the school, and or families or both, we are seeing that there are higher rates of engagement. And so that's why we work really hard to support the schools and provide them with the tools and the resources and the professional learning is needed so that they can establish those really strong relationships between home and school as well as in the classroom, and then building out time within the day so that, our academics are important, but how are we still making individual connections with our students so that they feel valued, their voice feels heard, and that they are an integral part of the school and the community.
Okay, outstanding. Thank you. I'm not sure if there's any other questions. I see Chairman Riggers. Just want to recognize him and feel free to take over if you would like to, sir. But are we okay to move forward in the presentation, or is there more? Or
Yeah, this was one of the pauses after a set of data slides.
Yep,
so
appreciate it.
If we're ready to move on, we certainly can do that.
Yeah, I don't see any other hands in the air or anybody reaching for the microphone. So please continue.
Great. So we just, reviewed around the attendance piece. And so now we'll shift to the culture and climate, the culture and engagement, which again, right, is work that we're looking at it more holistically and in partnership with the State Department of Education. Chief Barr.
Yes. So as you can see, we have our goals for the year that we like to identify as big rocks that our schools will be focusing on, as well as our team, connected to our strategic plan and our district model for excellence. So each school this year was charged with identifying a PBIS or restorative practice. So again, they were selecting positive behavior interventions or restorative approaches and practices. They were then implementing strong tier 1 practices related to these, either what was selected and in alignment with their school improvement plan or their PSEA. And then really this year, the focus was shifting the mindset from just solely talking about attendance and attendance data to the biweekly discussion around the whole child. And, because sometimes attendance is impacted by the culture and engagement piece. So what does that look like, and how can we better support our students with engagement? And the next slide shows where we, and the connection also to the school, the district culture and climate survey, where Dr. Silver will jump in shortly. But we really identified some baseline in discussions with the team and with the superintendent around what are our next steps to really support all of our students. And so we really said that we need to continue the normed practices around attendance. We identified that was working. We didn't want to put more on administrators' plates. We didn't want to put more on teachers' plates. Let's do what we're doing really well. And then we, really noticed that, especially the middle and high school, we still have a number of students who are disengaged. We did a lot of work last year around the no-show protocol. We did a disengagement protocol. We worked with Trinity College to do focus groups around students at the middle and high school that were disengaged. And we're kind of ending up with the same data. And even Trinity, they came back and they said, you're doing a lot of great things. Here's some additional information. So that's where we really decided that we needed to make the shift now to that culture and engagement piece. We reviewed the previous year, 22-23 referrals, suspensions. We reviewed the climate survey data, really to determine that we needed to prioritize the culture and engagement piece in ACE this year. And we quantified that data and really started to look at, what are the tiered interventions that we are utilizing connected to each of these priorities. And that is where we moved with our goal setting for this year. So if we look at the next slide, I believe this is where Dr. Silver is going to step in to go over the connection to the shift around our big rocks to the district survey.
Thank you so much, Chief Barney, and good evening, everyone. It's good to see you, my Hartford Schools family. So this is the this references our district cultural and climate survey, which was administered 2 times last year. And you can see at the top right, we had family participation at 47.5%, student participation at 73.5%, and staff participation at 57.3%. So this is encouraging data because we know that we can generalize these responses to the rest of the population. And here you see our district scorecard, which these items are embedded in our climate and culture survey, and they are also on our district scorecard. So our scorecard does draw from and include this perception data from our climate and culture survey. Our goals for the spring administration for each of these items reflect ambitious favorability ratings. So responses are counted as desirable when respondents agree with the statements and unfavorable when respondents disagree with the statements. So all of the statements are in a positive frame, and what you're seeing here are the 3 items. My child is supported in school. That was a family item. Students feel connected to school. That was a student item. And students and staff feel safe at school. So in the next couple slides, we're going to dig a little deeper into each of these items. So if we could move to the next slide. Thank you so much. So this first item that comes from our scorecard, my child feels supported at school. This is drawn from our family survey. Our goal was that 93% of families would agree with the statement that their child feels supported at school. And we do see 88% of respondents agreed with the statement, and it did leave us with a gap of 5 percentage points to our goal of 93%. So we observed from this data that 4.3% of our families surveyed disagreed with the statement, while 7.7% are neutral. The growth opportunity for us here with this item is to learn more from our families who disagree, while also communicating the diverse and rich support resources and tools that are available to students and families, communicating them more broadly. This would increase awareness about the supports available to students and may help those neutral responses transition to agree responses. Our next item, our next slide, thank you so much, is a student item. I feel connected to my school. And this is from our student survey, assessing students feeling connected to school. And 58% of our students agreed with the statement. So we had a gap to our target, our goals, by 4 percentage points, because our target was 62%. But we did want to look at our data through an equity lens. And what we observed here was that multilingual learners and students with disabilities, their agreement ratings for this item exceeded the goal of 62%. One of the opportunities that this data speaks to is creating stronger connections with our general education students and our students who fall into the high needs category. So our high needs group includes, I know you're all familiar with this, but students who have one or more of 3 demographic characteristics. So if the student qualifies for reduced price meals, or if the student is a multilingual learner, or if the student is a student with an identified disability, that those students fall into our high needs group. And we can see here that while agree response rates came close to the target for the all students and the high needs students, the data does speak to a need to ensure students are aware of the many ways they can connect with their school communities. And what we see here are the neutral students, the 22% for all students, 23% for all students, 22% for students with high needs. Communicating more with them is a great opportunity to raise awareness about the opportunities to connect more deeply with their school. And certainly, I anticipate with the next administration of the survey, we'll see those sway because of the work that Chief Barney's been doing with the with building relationships with students, and that deep investment, and also providing students with the right interventions, which is what the ACE team is doing. Finally, for this slide, the data from students who disagree, that invites a greater conversation with our youth, with our young people about what clubs and activities would foster stronger connections to schools. So that's another avenue that I know is in place and being explored. So we can go to the next slide. And again, the final item that is in our scorecard from the survey is students and staff feeling safe from harm at school. Now, in the scorecard, these response groups are all combined so that students and staff appear together. So that is the green bars. Those are the green bars on this graph. And you can see that feeling safe at school has the combined responses. 65% of students and staff feel safe at school. So that does fall short of our goal of 78.5%. But we separated out this data to better understand the response patterns for students and staff. And the student respondent group, which was 9,342 students, that's almost 5 times larger than the staff respondent group, which was 1,945 staff. So this view of the data helps us to understand that the student group has a greater proportion of respondents feeling neutral or disagreeing with the items "I feel safe in school." These data also show that about 1 in 5 respondents are neutral, and about 1 in 5 disagree that they feel safe from harm at school. So 3 in 5 are agreeing that they do feel safe at school. So our actions include using ESSER funding, for some quick wins, upgrading security equipment, cameras, door entries, etc., across schools, as well as completing restorative practice training across all of our schools. And Chief Barney mentioned earlier, PBIS and RAP, right, as 2 of the common restorative practices that are aimed at supporting learners in our schools. Also following up to ensure fidelity to school safety team processes across schools, and strategically deploying security officers to respond to the needs identified in schools and in the community, ensuring that those officers are embedded as role models and positive figures within the schools, as many of them are. So the opportunity here is that students have the lowest favorability, and that's why, again, listening and responding to what we hear is so important. And so I'll pause here.
Thank you. I saw a question with regard to the 2022 data. So I looked in and just want to go back. So in terms of the question around "my child feels supported in school," in 2022 was 89%. It's Dr. Silva, I'm looking at the scorecard. Student feeling connected in school was 58% in 2022. And then student and staff feel safe at school in 2022 was 68. So if we go to the slide 16, just so that we can kind of follow, and Chairman, let me know if this is the question that you had. Is that the question that you raised relevant to this data set? How does it compare to 2022?
That's correct. Yeah, I was just looking for a comparative.
Yes, so in terms of "my child feels supported in school," the top one there in 2022 was 89%. Students feel connected to school was 58%. And then students and staff feel safe at school was 68%.
So if I'm hearing correctly, then we went, and those were actuals, correct?
That's how we ended.
Okay, so then last year was 89%, this year is 88. Last year was 58. This year is 58, so no change. And then last year for students and staff feel safe, it was 68. And this year is 65. So if I'm hearing correctly, we went down 2 out of the 3 and stayed neutral on 1.
So this is spring data. I just want to confirm. This is last spring. So when you're asking me about 2022, is the year 21, 22?
Is the full year 21, 22? I guess my
Yes.
question is a year. So my comparative is year over year.
Yes.
So
So
at
Dr.
this-
Silver, am I answering it the right way? I
Yes,
think
you
I
are.
am.
You are, and I would say to Mr. Riggers, Chairman Riggers' point about the, going from an 89% to 88%, from 58 to 58, from 68 to 65. The 68 to 65 is, there may be something there, but the other is modest fluctuation on an average. It's really not a statistically significant change. So it's very modest change.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? All right, not seeing or hearing any, please continue.
Chief Barney, yes, the suspension data, please.
Yes. So thank you, Dr. Silver, for the connection to the district climate survey. So to further share the data that was reviewed in selecting the focus for this school year and then the actions moving forward, we reviewed the suspension rate trend, and this has the bars colored. So you have 18-19, 21-22, and 22-23. As you can see, in the box at the top, 1 in 4 middle school students were suspended. 8th grade students had the highest rates of suspension as well, comparative to the rest of the district. And then the next slide breaks the data down by ISS, which is inside suspension, OSS, which is out of school suspension, and then expulsions. And it again breaks it down by the school year. So 22-23, 23 this current school year, last year, and then this current school year are each of the colored bars. So again, following the trend, grades 6 through 10 are the most likely to be suspended, and 9 through 12 are the most likely to be expelled. And there has been an increase in outside suspensions for grades 9 and 10. Those are the last 2 data slides. So I didn't know if we want me to keep going.
Yeah, maybe you can review the restorative practices. I think that connects to some of what we're trying to support the schools with.
So yes, so this slide shares the connection to the big rock that was the 3 big rocks that were named at the beginning. So when we looked at the data, we dove in, looked at referrals, suspensions, expulsions. That's where we really identified, what were practices that worked really well with attendance that we can replicate, but also support schools with. And so we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. Where are we doing those tools really well? So some of those tools include the RAP, the restorative practices, the PBIS positive behavior interventions and supports, and then other schools had school-specific models like CREW, Ruler, or BRIC. Based that are connected to their themes. So we are also finding that when we were reviewing the data, some schools were doing everything. Some schools were doing one thing. So we really wanted to norm around it and connect it to our strategic plan. So that's where all of the schools were asked to select a practice and connect it to their PSEA, their Plan for School Excellence and Accountability, which is the school improvement plan. So as you can see with the pie chart, 17 of our schools selected PBIS, positive behavior interventions and supports. And so for that program is really a framework for whole school practices that promote a safe school setting. They have social, emotional, and learning skills. They also work on behavioral needs for all students. And they build out with a connection to the second step curriculum. And then 19 of our schools selected restorative practices or RAP, which is also similar to PBIS in that it focuses on whole school supports, but this really strengthens relationships between individuals. So student to student, student to teacher, student to community, teacher to student. So, and it can even be built out for staff as well. It has a component where teachers can also utilize restorative practices for their relationships with each other. And it includes more work around like effective statements, community building, conferencing, setting up clear goals and agreements and norms across the building. So for all common spaces. And then we had 6 schools who selected school-specific practices, whether it be CREW, whether it was ruler or the brick model. And then the next slide really just kind of breaks down for you what are some of the key components of PBIS versus restorative practices. So again, looking, and you can also see some of the similarities as well. But with PBIS, we are really reinforcing, as board member Ledger said earlier, the positive behaviors. And you're honoring students that are excelling in the classroom, attaining the goals, meeting the normed expectations. But you're also supporting the students with attainment of the skills needed so that they can be successful in the classroom through community building, skill building, morning circle. This is also connected to the ACE team meeting. So you're meeting regularly to review data, individual student data, grade level data, teacher data to really determine the interventions and supports. And then there is a family communication connection as well. Whereas RAP is really around forming respect agreements. So PBIS, a lot of the norms are through the program. Restorative approaches, classrooms create the respect agreements together. So for example, a 4th grade may share a hallway with a 5th grade, and they may meet in the hallway at the beginning of the school year and create the agreements for how they are going to transition, how are they going to utilize the lockers, how are they going to pass in the hallway. It also, the restorative approaches focus on community building circles and team building activities through discussion prompts. It also has restorative circles and works on rebuilding the harm that is done. Connecting back to the respect agreements and the community norms. And then the last slide before the glossary of terms really outlines the steps that we have taken and are taking going into the next quarter. So, whoops, excuse me, just shut my computer off. Here we go. So we were very intentional around professional learning. So providing restorative practices training through IIRP, which is the International Institute for Restorative Practices. That's going to be a continuation of the prior work we did last year. So last year, we really built out our 6 through 12 and support services, providing them with the training around restorative practices, circles, community building, respect agreements. And we also began the train the trainer model so that we can continue the practices and be sustainable beyond this year. and continuing that professional learning this year, we will have a refresher course for our train the trainers, so that we are set up next year to support new staff coming into all buildings, so that they too are trained. We again set the biweekly rotation for attendance and culture engagement. We're in the process of updating the code of conduct, as we did with the attendance manual. We're really shifting the current practices so that we're proactive. A lot of the practices within the code of conduct were reactionary or could be exclusionary, and we really want to be proactive and ensure that there is equity through all of our practices. Then the big lift that we are rolling out in the upcoming weeks, we have updated all of our data collection practices as well as our platforms. So we did find that a barrier just as when we were rolling out attendance was that we have a lot of data in a lot of different places, or we were not collecting all the accurate data that we needed in order to best support our students and our staff. So we have updated those systems and will be also housing that information in open architects going forward. And then ongoing professional development for behavior technicians with the support of Ryan Brown now and Aaron Doyle, who is on, really working on, again, being proactive and how do we support students socially, emotionally, and give them the resources they need so that students feel successful in the classroom, can be successful in the classroom, and be engaged in the learning. And that is also where we hired Ryan. He is the temporary district school safe climate coordinator. And then the other piece is the alignment of ACE practices to the PSCA plans. So we built out a culture and climate look for tool that we have included in all of our learning walks and are providing feedback to administrators, teachers around the interventions, the supports, as well as just the classroom environment. And then alignment to the coaching supports at the school level and at the central office level, so that we are ensuring that all the teams have everything they need and all the resources to support their goal for the year and improve student engagement. And I believe that is the last slide other than the glossary.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a lot. But I also think there's some really good information. I want to make sure my colleagues don't have any questions before we move forward to adjourn. Just want to make sure I'm not seeing any questions. We kind of glossed over the October. I forgot the slide. It was like 6 slides ago, or maybe like around the October, not absenteeism, but the
suspensions.
So there it is. I didn't want to use the wrong word. Suspensions.
Slide 20 or slide 20, I think.
Yeah, and kind of to Chairman Rigger's question previously, can I see the comparable?
If you're talking about suspension, it's slide 20, and we have year 2018-19, 21-22, and 22-23. So there's a comparable there. And then the same for ISS, OSX, and expulsions. So if we want to look at a trend, or I don't know if that's the question that if that's what you're wondering, like how did we trend?
Are we trending? Yeah, are we trending? You know, when we look at 3rd through 5th, right? Critical years, right there, and that's what I'm most concerned about. Is that 3rd through 5th kind of category? because according to the smart folks, they say that this is the critical time where students probably need the most engagement, right? Are we trending, since the pandemic, post-pandemic to this point, are we trending downward with the level of suspensions and out of school time with the three, third through fifth? And, when it comes to sixth through eighth, I mean, I think we've all been teenagers, right? So we know that you're probably most active and probably most not deviant, but your emotions, your hormone, like you just don't want to be nowhere you don't want to be, kind of thing. Are we? It appears to me that our third through fifth is pretty normal, unless I'm reading that differently. And then I'm seeing spikes from 6 to 8, and I was just wondering. Like I said, I'm not the brightest light bulb in the pack. Can you just give me some explanation from what I'm looking at?
Chief Barney, do you have, I mean, I see it here, we see it here, but do you have trends that you can speak to besides what we can see here? I mean, you're right, Board Member Johnson, right? When we look at that second cluster.
So yes, I think Board Member Johnson, like, you're correct that what we're seeing is that our K through 5, we're reducing. Like, so the ISSs are a little bit higher than they had been. However, the outside suspensions are trending lower. And then we see the spike in middle school. And so that's where we are doing a lot of, we're making a lot of the changes. So around collecting the data, reviewing referrals that have been submitted at the middle school level. So because we do know, like you said, I was in middle school. I had 2 younger brothers who gave my parents gray hair in middle school and high school for their hijinks. And so one of the things that we were looking at when we have done a dive is, what are students in middle school being suspended for? So like, what is an OSS? What is an ISS? And we were finding, again, connected to the code of conduct and the work that we're doing there, that a student in one school could get ISS, whereas a student in another school might get OSS for the same behavior. So we really need to norm around, like, what is a level 1 behavior, what's a level 2, what's a level 3, and how are we supporting schools with norming their practices, but then also giving them the supports to handle, what might be a teacher handled behavior, what might be, a middle schooler, fooling around, trying to get a friend's attention, but not necessarily, really breaking a code of conduct or violating something in a severe way. So that's where I think that social emotional piece comes into play and supporting, but then also doing some work around the middle school brain and the science there to connect to support teachers, that may not be health teachers, that don't have that background around, how can we support the kids, build relationships, and then also using our outside resource as well, our community partners, the city, to support wraparound services as needed for our students as well. And then also looking at, how can we build out, I think someone brought it up, one of the board members brought it up earlier too, just the engagement in the curriculum, like what interests our kids, and what can we provide as enrichment opportunities, whether it be athletics, esports, rocket building, skateboarding, basketball, so that they can build the relationships and the friendships outside of school that then carry over within the school day.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation. And when I'm looking at the numbers of like 390 393 and 359, are those total, out of school, in school suspensions throughout that year?
Yes. Yep. So it would be year to date. So yes, so the 359 that you're looking at would be ISS 23-24 to date.
Okay. And that's, just say 393 out of how many students do we have in our district? Like, I mean, look, well, you are the brightest and the best, right? So I am going to ask, because you all are the brightest and the best, right? So percentage wise, out of, all of our students, is that, would you say that's like 10% of our body, that, 13%? Like, I mean, I'm not asking for solid numbers. Like, I think that's
2%.
unreasonable, but
2.2, 2.3.
2.2, 2.3%. See, that's
The
why
390, right? 390 out
Right.
of 16,500 roughly students.
Okay. So, I mean, that's fair to say that with the behaviors and things that happen in the school, we're putting students not out, but we're enforcing our policies around about 2.3%, right, of the entire body, right? I'm trying to get this out, and I'm trying to get it out properly, but I just want to get a bigger scope of, where are we putting, how are we dealing with our students as it pertains to behavior, social, all those different deterrents and variations, right? And it sounds like 2% of our entire body is being suspended, or in, so forth and so on.
Well, the number that you gave me was relative to ISS. Yes? Right, 300 and, yes.
Yes, compared to our entire body of students, right? Across the district.
It's only for, well, we would have to add across. If we're only looking at how many students are in ISS, right? So we would add those across, only for the ISS, across the grades, across these clusters. I think correct me if I'm wrong, that what you're wondering about is it just suspensions, the way that we are addressing our student needs, our student behavior needs?
Yes.
Yeah. No, it is. So we have here ISS, OSS, and even expulsions. However, there are tiered supports that we provide for students, and Chief Barney talked about, right, we start with the positive behavior intervention supports that are school-wide supports, and then depending on student needs, right, they get, some students might need support from the social worker in a group work setting. Some might need one-on-one support. Some others need more of a wraparound support if they're, for example, in a community school. A community partner, could provide additional services. So I think it really depends on the student need, the frequency, and then also for our team to support at the school level, right? Because it might be that a student responds to the culture and the climate in that classroom, in that school. Chief Barney, you can expand on that, but I wanted to make sure that I understood, that I got at what Board Member Johnson was wondering about, and that it's not just that we respond with, right, an exclusionary practice. That is warranted, that at times are warranted.
Yeah, no, certainly. And Chief Barney, you don't have to elaborate. I want to get to Board Member Walker's question. Go ahead, Board Member Walker.
Thanks, Chair. So, Chief Barney, since we've been focusing on the discipline, You brought up some variation between in school and out of school suspension decisions. I'd like to see that data presented. I think in addition to what you're showing here with trends, I think we should always include where we sense and see variation, because variation is always going to be an opportunity for some kind of improvement, modification. So let's just make it visible. The other thing that would be nice to see from the data you have here is I would like to see that data sliced and diced by gender and race, to see if there's variation in that area too. So those are more requests. I don't particularly have any questions. So if I'm just want to get those 2 data requests out there, and obviously you can provide it to us post this meeting. Thanks.
Any other questions from my colleagues or board members? Okay, not hearing any. Superintendent, any closing remarks or anything that you might want to add?
I actually want to highlight that Dr. Silver kind of sent me the number that you were requesting, and it is the ISS across all grades is 4.4%. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Silver. All right. If there are no more questions, comments, or concerns, I believe this is a place where we release everyone to enjoy the rest of their evenings. Is that correct, Doctor?
Thank you
Dr.
so
Rodriguez.
much. Thank you, team. Thank you thank you, board members, for all of your questions as well.
Yep. Thank you all so much. And to our staff, thank you so much for the work that you do. It does not go unnoticed, and we really, really, really deeply appreciate you. And I know everyone is probably tired from the long day and you're getting ready for what's ahead. So to our viewers, thank you so much for joining this workshop. Have a wonderful evening. God bless each and every one of you.